Judge Theodore Grayson leaned back in his chair, a smug smirk growing across his face as the courtroom became silent. His condescending tone reverberated across the room. He remarked, "Miss Carter, do you know where you are?" to a teenage girl wearing jeans and a basic hoodie, her locks disheveled. She shifted uneasily on the shiny floor, her sneakers squeaking a little. "This is a court of law, not some high school debate team." The courtroom echoed with laughter. The lawyers looked at each other with amusement as they sat behind their desks. With a stack of documents that felt nearly too heavy for her petite size, the girl stood by herself at the defendant's table. Her eyes remained fixed on the judge, despite her hot cheeks. "Your Honor," she said calmly in spite of the taunts. "I'm here to—" Judge Grayson waved his hand to interrupt her. "Preserve it. Juvenile antics have no place in this court. I have no idea why the court permitted this absurdity." With a stern voice, the girl lifted her chin. "If you would let me speak, Your Honor, you might find it worth your time." There was a gasp in the courtroom. It was unprecedented for a teenager to have the gall to address a court in such a manner. Judge Grayson's grin turned into a frown as he leaned forward. His sarcastic remark was, "Well, by all means, enlighten us all." The girl inhaled deeply, rearranged the papers in her palm, and started. The courtroom was left in stunned silence by what transpired next. It became evident that she wasn't just any adolescent as she spoke, presenting a convincing case while referencing court procedures, constitutional provisions, and legal precedents. She was confident, informed, and remarkably accurate. The lawyers who had just been giggling were now scrawling notes frantically. Judge Grayson's face changed from laughter to incredulity. He leaned forward in his seat and shouted out, "Who are you?" His tone changed from one of derision to one of sincere confusion. The girl paused, looked up at him, and grinned a little. "I'm Amelia Carter," she stated, "and I'm here to defend my client." Questions were flying in all directions as the room exploded into mayhem. The judge's own poise was obviously rattled, yet he slammed his gavel, demanding order. How could a teenager wield such power and control over the courtroom? Who had permitted this? What was happening? Then, for the first time, Amelia's composed grin wavered, a moment of hesitation showing on her face. With all eyes on her, the courtroom became silent once more. What would she disclose? Amelia Carter had been sitting in her tiny bedroom 2 weeks prior, surrounded by legal papers and law books. The books belonged to James, her older brother, who had been studying for the bar exam, not to her. However, James had passed away, and Amelia had resolved to find out everything he knew. Lily, her best friend, referred to her as insane. "What are you even doing?" One afternoon, while eating on a bag of chips and lying cross-legged on Amelia's bed, Lily had inquired. "You're about 16 years old. You're not an attorney." While drafting case summaries, Amelia's fingers hesitated over her notebook. Her attitude was solemn as she glanced up at Lily. "What people think doesn't matter to me. I must complete this task." "But why?" Softening her voice, Lily pressed. "Why can't you just let it go?" Amelia took a while to respond. Instead, with her brow knitted in focus, she turned the pages of one of James's old textbooks. "Because someone has to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves," she said. James also thought I could succeed. After that, Lily didn't protest. Rather, she observed her best friend devoting herself to studies, getting ready for an apparently unachievable task. Amelia kept the fact that she was obsessed with the law and not merely about helping people a secret from Lily and from everyone else. She needed to prove something to herself. She had been treated like a helpless kid after James's death, as if one wrong word might shatter her. Teachers, neighbors, and even her own parents had begun to avoid her. She was not a child, however, and she was not delicate. She was intelligent, tenacious, and driven to prove to everyone that she could change things. Amelia had regained her calm in the courtroom, but the mood remained tight. Still clearly embarrassed, Judge Grayson sat back in his chair and looked at her intently. "Miss Carter," he spoke softly, You're telling me you're representing the defendant? Amelia gave a nod. Yes, Your Honor. His tone was doubtful, but no longer derisive as he inquired, And where exactly did you study law? She answered steadily, If that's what you're asking, I didn't attend law school. However, I've been studying court procedures and legal books for the past year. I think I'm qualified to defend my client since I've read every case pertaining to this issue. 40 minutes later, at Rikers Island Prison, the fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow over the visitors' room. Eleanor and Daniel sat at a cold metal table, waiting. The door on the other side of the glass buzzed open, and a tall, tired-looking man in an orange jumpsuit stepped in. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His once strong frame was now worn down by time and circumstance. Thomas Green. His eyes locked onto Eleanor the moment he saw her. A flicker of something passed through them. Recognition, curiosity, maybe even resentment. He took a seat across from them, picking up the phone on his side of the glass. Eleanor did the same. "You got some nerve coming here, Lawson," he said, his voice rough from years of silence. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "I know." Thomas leaned forward slightly. "What do you want?" Eleanor's voice was steady. "Calloway is back." Thomas stilled. His grip on the phone tightened, his jaw clenching. "He's back?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Eleanor nodded. "And I need to know what he's planning." Thomas let out a bitter laugh. "You think I know, lady? I've been locked up for 30 years because of that man. He hasn't spoken my name since the day he had me put away." Daniel, sitting beside Eleanor, hesitated. "But if Calloway was willing to ruin your life to protect himself back then, don't you think he'd still be keeping tabs on you now?" Thomas exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, I don't know what he's up to, but if he's back in the city, it's bad news for everyone." Eleanor studied him carefully. "What was the last thing Calloway said to you before your conviction?" Thomas's jaw tightened. He glanced away for a moment, lost in old memories. Then quietly he said, "He told me I was a loose end." Daniel frowned. "A loose end?" Thomas nodded. "He didn't just want me convicted, he wanted me erased. He told me the world would forget my name." Eleanor's fingers tapped against the table thoughtfully. Calloway had always been calculated. He didn't make reckless moves. Everything was precise, intentional. If he had returned now, after all these years, it meant something had changed. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here to finish something. Eleanor took a deep breath. "Thomas, if I find a way to prove your innocence..." Thomas let out a dry laugh. "Don't bother, Lawson. No one cares about an old case." Eleanor's expression didn't change. "I care." Thomas studied her for a long moment, then finally he sighed, leaning closer to the glass. "There's one thing you need to know, Eleanor." Eleanor and Daniel leaned in. "Calloway wasn't working alone back then," Thomas said quietly. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" Thomas shook his head. "I don't know all their names, but I do know one thing." His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "They never left." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. Daniel swallowed. You're saying there are still people in power covering for him?" Thomas nodded. "And if Calloway's back, it means they want him back." The weight of his words sank in. This wasn't just about an old enemy resurfacing. This was bigger. Eleanor exhaled, setting down the phone. "Thank you, Thomas." Thomas gave her a tired look. "Don't thank me, just finish what you started." Eleanor stood. Daniel hesitated before following her. As they walked toward the exit, Daniel turned to her. "Miss Lawson, what do we do now?" Eleanor's expression was unreadable. Then, quietly, she said, "We find the people pulling Calloway's strings." She stepped through the doors, her mind racing. Calloway was dangerous, but the ones hiding in the shadows, the ones who had kept him protected all these years, they were worse. And now she was going to expose them, no matter what it took. The cold night air clung to Eleanor as she and Daniel exited Rikers Island. The weight of Thomas Green's words sat heavy between them. The idea that Calloway had been part of something bigger, that powerful people had kept him hidden all these years, sent a sharp pulse of unease through Eleanor's chest. Danielle broke the silence first. "Miss Lawson, if what Green said is true, we're not just dealing with Calloway anymore. We're dealing with everyone who protected him." Eleanor nodded, her expression hard. "That's exactly right." Daniel swallowed. "So, where do we even start? How do you track down people who've stayed hidden for 30 years? Eleanor's answer was immediate. "We follow the money." Daniel blinked. "Money?" Eleanor turned to him. "Corrupt men don't disappear, Daniel. They shift. They change positions, but one thing always remains the same. They protect their wealth." Daniel frowned. "Okay, but Calloway lost everything when he was disbarred. He doesn't have money anymore, right?" Eleanor gave him a knowing look. "Do you really believe that?" Daniel hesitated. Calloway had been one of the most powerful prosecutors in the state. A man like him didn't just walk away with nothing. Daniel sighed. "All right, so how do we track his money?" Eleanor's eyes darkened. "We talk to someone who knows how to find it." The judge's eyebrows went up. "You think you're capable? This isn't how it operates." Amelia did not recoil. "Then let me prove it." There was silence in the courtroom. Everyone was waiting to see the judge's next move. The door at the rear of the courtroom sprang open before Judge Grayson could finish his sentence. A tall, well-dressed man walked in. The man said, "Your Honor," his loud voice echoing around the room, "I believe I can shed some light on this situation." Amelia's confident demeanor gradually gave way to one of trepidation as she turned to face him. What did this man want, and who was he? Attention was drawn to the tall man. With his briefcase swinging easily in his palm, he strode with a sense of authority. Amelia's plain attire contrasted sharply with his neat gray suit and polished shoes. Everyone in the courtroom turned their attention to him, and as they wondered who he was and why he was there, the whispers became louder. Judge Grayson said, "Excuse me, sir," his voice taking on a more authoritative tone. "Who are you, and what business do you have interrupting my courtroom?" The man put his briefcase carefully on the table and stopped just in front of the bench. He nodded respectfully as he turned to face the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize. Daniel Hayes is my name, and I am here on behalf of the Bar Association." There was a flutter of surprise throughout the courtroom. Amelia glanced at the man, attempting to understand his intentions, her heart pounding. Why is there a representative of the Bar Association present? Was she involved in this? She tightened her hold on the pile of papers. Judge Grayson's eyebrows went up. The Association of Bars? Why are they interested in this case? Before answering, Mr. Hayes took a folder out of his briefcase and flipped through a few pages. "Your Honor, it's not the case itself. It has to do with representation." He gave Amelia a quick glance and went on. "An unlicensed person trying to represent a client in court was the subject of an anonymous report to us. We take this issue very seriously, of course." The room's air was heavy. Amelia felt sick to her stomach. It felt as though everything was going to fall apart after all the hard work she had put in to get here. She took a deep breath and pushed herself to her feet. "Unlicensed?" A smirk tugged at the corner of Judge Grayson's mouth as he repeated. "Well, Mr. Hayes, you can probably understand why this is so erratic. Miss Carter has no formal legal training, as I just mentioned. At best, her presence here is dubious." Amelia moved forward before Mr. Hayes could answer. Although solid, there was a hint of desperation in her voice. "I know this is out of the ordinary, Your Honor, but I've done the study. I've done as much preparation as any lawyer would for this case. My client is entitled to a just defense." Judge Grayson grinned more broadly. "This is a court of law, not a stage for showmanship, Miss Carter. Are you even aware of how serious what you're trying to do is?" "I do," Amelia responded sharply and without hesitation. And I also realize that my client's life could be ruined if they don't have someone fighting for them." The courtroom echoed with a murmur of agreement. Even some of the lawyers who had first written her off were beginning to show some respect for her. Judge Grayson scowled, obviously annoyed by the change of tone. Mr. Hayes drew attention to himself by clearing his throat. "Your Honor, I think it's only right to listen to Miss Carter, even though I acknowledge that the circumstances are unusual. Ultimately, the goal of the law is to uphold justice, not to stifle it." Judge Grayson scowled more. He considered his alternatives as he glanced from Mr. Hayes to Amelia and back again. With a final sigh, he leaned forward. "Fine," he replied. "I'll let you continue for the time being, Miss Carter, but I'll hold you in contempt if I discover that you're squandering this court's time. Do I express myself clearly?" "Yes, Your Honor," Amelia said, her voice full of relief. She inhaled deeply before launching into her argument. It wasn't always this bold of Amelia. She had been a typical adolescent a year prior, more interested in hanging out with her pals than engaging in legal disputes. But the day her brother James was taken into custody, everything was different. Astute, compassionate, and fiercely protective, James had been Amelia's hero. He got into an altercation with a wealthy businessman outside a club. Only 2 months before he was set to graduate from law school, James was detained and charged when the man accused him of assaulting him, even though James insisted that it was self-defense. Amelia's parents had made an effort to assist, but they lacked the funds to get a reputable lawyer. Overworked and disinterested, the public defender assigned to James's case hardly fought in court. James was ultimately found guilty and given a 3-year prison term. Amelia had been heartbroken to see her brother, a man who had devoted his life to upholding the law, fall prey to the exact system he supported. It destroyed her belief in justice. But she chose to fight rather than give up. She would find a means to correct the situation and educate herself on the law. Amelia returned to the courtroom and threw herself into her argument with new vigor. As she presented the evidence in support of her client, her words were clear and her voice steady. Sitting next to her was the customer, a middle-aged guy named Mr. Peterson, who appeared both scared and hopeful. He strongly refuted the accusation that he had embezzled money from his employer. Amelia suggested that someone else might have been at fault by presenting documents that demonstrated inconsistencies in the business's financial records. She cited court rulings in favor of her client's entitlement to a comprehensive probe. The courtroom paid close attention. For a minute, even Judge Grayson's demeanor was inscrutable as he leaned forward in his chair. Amelia had a glimmer of hope that she might be able to pull this off. Then Mr. Hayes got to his feet. "Your Honor," he remarked in a composed yet strong tone, "even when Miss Carter makes a compelling case, her lack of a law license remains unaffected. Allowing her to go on creates a risky precedent." Once more there was a hum of anxiety in the courtroom. Judge Grayson's face was stern as he gazed at Amelia. He responded, "Miss Carter, I give you one final opportunity to defend yourself. Who authorized you to serve as the case's legal counsel?" Amelia paused, her thoughts whirling. Although she had studied for this question, her confidence faltered when it finally came. She inhaled deeply and opened her lips to reply, but the courtroom door opened again before she could say anything. This time, a young lad, no older than 10, entered, instead of a professional in a suit. The youngster yelled, "Aye," as his voice broke the uncomfortable silence. Amelia's eyes widened in surprise as she turned. "Ethan?" she said in a whisper. The child, holding a crumpled envelope, hurried toward her. Saying, "You forgot this?" He pushed the envelope toward her. Amelia's heart was racing as she gazed at him. The envelope was instantly familiar to her. She had never planned to disclose it. Not now, not here. There was no escaping it, though, with the whole courtroom looking. Why was the contents of the envelope so important? Amelia accepted it from Ethan with trembling hands, feeling as though 1,000 eyes were on her. Amelia snatched the package from Ethan, her fingers shaking. Her grip was so strong that she felt as though she could will it to vanish. There was complete silence in the courtroom as everyone strained to understand the significance of the crumpled paper in her hands. "Miss Carter," said Judge Grayson, his tone piercing, "what's in that envelope?" Amelia paused, her thoughts whirling. She had no intention of showing anyone what was in the envelope, not here, not in front of a crowded courtroom, and definitely not with Judge Grayson watching her every action. However, it had been brought here by Ethan in his innocence, and now she had to deal with it. She said, her voice wavering, It's nothing that concerns this case, Your Honor." The eyes of Judge Grayson narrowed. "You're already treading carefully, Miss Carter. I can guarantee you that it won't go well if you're hiding something important from these proceedings." Amelia took a deep breath. As Ethan's big eyes gazed up at her with unadulterated trust, she felt his tiny fingers tugging at her sleeve. "Show them, Amelia," he said in a barely audible whisper. Her heart fell. The youngster was merely attempting to assist, so she couldn't hold it against him if he didn't comprehend the repercussions of what he was asking her to do. She inhaled deeply and looked at Mr. Peterson, her client, who had a confused and scared expression on his face. Amelia reached for the envelope, but Daniel Hayes pushed forward once again before she could open it. "Your Honor," he said in a calm tone, "I believe we're becoming distracted from the current issue. Whether Miss Carter is qualified to represent a client has nothing to do with whether or not she has this envelope or what's inside." Mr. Hayes was silenced when the judge raised a hand. "According to Judge Grayson, I'll be the one to determine what's relevant here." Amelia stole herself and inhaled deeply. Everything may go apart if she told anyone what was in the package. Judge Grayson would probably hold her in contempt if she didn't comply. She felt totally alone for a minute as the decision's weight weighed heavily on her. The judge repeated, "Miss Carter?" in a low, warning tone. "I'm not going to ask again. Get the envelope open." Amelia's eyes shifted from the judge to Ethan, then to Mr. Peterson and back again. She had no choice but to gingerly tear apart the envelope's top and extract its contents. There was a note inside, scrawled in the careful, clean script of her brother James. As Amelia unfolded it, her eyes scanned the sentences she knew by heart, and her throat constricted. James's last letter to her before being sent to prison was a plea. It was full of inspiration, optimism, and the challenge to defend the rights of those unable to defend themselves, no matter how unachievable it may appear. Uncertain of what to do next, Amelia's hands trembled as she gripped the letter. The tension in the courtroom was so high that a knife might pierce it. "What is it, Miss Carter?" Judge Grayson inquired in a calmer, even inquisitive tone. After giving it some thought, Amelia folded the note and put it back in the envelope. She forcefully stated, "It's personal," looking directly into the judge's eyes, "and it has nothing to do with this case." Judge Grayson was silent for a while. The air was thick with expectancy, and the room was quiet. At last he sighed and reclined in his chair. "Fine," he replied. "But know this, Miss Carter, this is your final opportunity. I'll be forced to kick you out of this courtroom if you cause any more disturbances." With a wave of relief, Amelia nodded. She offered Ethan a little comforting smile as she looked at him. "Thank you," she ruffled his hair and whispered, "You can go sit with Lily now." With a nod, Ethan hurried to the rear of the courtroom where Lily, Amelia's closest friend, was sitting and watching with apprehension. Amelia turned back to the judge, prepared to make another point, but the courthouse doors exploded open again before she could say anything more. This time, a tall, stern-looking woman, wearing a dark blazer, with her hair pushed back into a tight bun, entered instead of a youngster or a lawyer. As she strode forward, her keen eyes searched the room, and she exuded authority. "Your Honor," the woman murmured, her voice like a knife piercing the quiet, "Margaret Steele is my name. I'm here to deal with a very important issue on behalf of the district attorney's office." Judge Grayson scowled. "This is really erratic, Miss Steele. What reason may there be for disturbing my courtroom?" Miss Steele turned to look at Amelia, her face unreadable. "It has to do with the unapproved presence of this person," she stated, pointing to Amelia, "and the repercussions of permitting her to proceed." Chaos broke out in the courtroom once more. When Amelia understood that Miss Steele wasn't there to encourage her, but rather to undermine her, her stomach fell. "Order!" Judge Grayson banged his gavel and yelled, "Miss Steele, you will explain yourself now." Miss Steele gave a nod. "Your Honor, of course. I've come to tell this court that it would be a grave ethical transgression if Miss Carter is permitted to continue. It is my responsibility as the District Attorney's Office representative to make sure that this court's credibility is maintained." Amelia felt her heart thumping in her chest. It felt like the whole system was working against her after she had put in so much effort to get here. But with everything on the line, she couldn't give up. "Your Honor," she replied, her voice firm in spite of the horror that was rising within her. "I humbly ask for the opportunity to prove myself. Despite not having a law degree, I have completed the necessary coursework. I think I'm the most qualified individual to defend my client since I've studied the law." Judge Grayson's face was unreadable as he gazed at her. He looked around the crowded courtroom, then at Mr. Hayes, then at Miss Steele. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for his decision, and the tension in the room was evident. At last, he said something. He stated, "I'll allow this hearing to continue," in a forceful voice. "However, you are now on very thin ice, Miss Carter. I won't think twice about ending this if you make even one mistake. Do I express myself clearly?" "Yes, Your Honor," Amelia responded, her voice full of relief. Her relief, however, was fleeting. A sneer played at the corners of Miss Steele's mouth as she took another step forward. "In that case, Your Honor," she responded, "I'd like to call my first witness." Amelia's heart froze. "Observe? What witness?" she asked herself. This was not what she had expected. There was a startled stillness in the courtroom as Miss Steele turned toward the door. A man came in, a man Amelia knew immediately. James, her brother, had been accused by the businessman. Amelia's thoughts were spinning when she froze. What brought him here? What was Miss Steele going to do next? And what did he have to do with this case? The air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. Watching the guy wearing a fitted navy suit stroll into the courtroom made Amelia's stomach turn. He exuded the same haughtiness that had plagued her ever since James's conviction. Not only was he unexpected, but he was a threat. His lips curled into a smile that made her skin crawl as he looked at her. Miss Steele pointed at him. "This is Mr. Victor Grant, Your Honor. His testimony is essential to proving why this court cannot let Miss Carter to continue her representation, and he is a vital witness." Amelia's mind was racing with questions and her heart was racing. What on earth could Victor Grant say about her? How was he related to this case by Miss Steele? Judge Grayson scowled. "Mr. Grant's presence is highly irregular," he expressed in a doubtful tone. "Explain, Miss Steele, why this man's testimony is relevant to these proceedings." "With respect, Your Honor," said Miss Steele, "Mr. Grant has important information about Miss Carter's history and intentions. The fundamental problems that render her unfit to serve as legal advice, even in an unusual role, will be exposed by his testimony." Amelia's hands began to perspire. Simply put, this was an ambush. She turned to face her client, Mr. Peterson, who was staring at her with increasing discomfort. She had to move fast, but she was too shaken to show it. "Your Honor," replied Amelia, "I object to this witness," she continued. "The facts of this case are unaffected by his testimony." In order to silence her, Judge Grayson held out a hand. "Miss Carter, I'll decide what's relevant," he responded. "Mr. Grant, take the stand." As he was sworn in, Victor Grant took the witness stand, his grin never leaving his face. Amelia's mind was racing. She had researched Mr. Peterson's case from every possible perspective, but this was completely unexpected. The image of Grant, the guy who had ruined her brother's future, made her fury boil, but she had to keep her focus. Miss Steele started asking questions. "Mr. Grant, can you describe your prior interactions with Miss Carter?" Grant's eyes glowed with contentment. He answered, "Of course, with ease. It was at her brother's trial that I first met Miss Carter. He was found guilty of attacking me during a furious fight outside a pub. The court judged him guilty because the evidence was unmistakable. They whispered in the courtroom. Amelia's hands clenched and her face heated. Grant was not merely unearthing the past, he was rewriting it to fit his story. "And how did Miss Carter behave during that time?" Miss Steele inquired, her tone brimming with false worry. "She was disruptive," Grant said in an innocent-sounding tone. "She came to all the hearings, staring at me as if I were a villain. She refused to let it go, even after the trial. She attempted to reactivate the case by writing letters and making phone calls. It was compulsive." Amelia stepped forward. "This is unrelated to Mr. Peterson's case, Your Honor. This is an attempt to undermine my reputation." Judge Grayson looked at her sternly. "It will be your time to answer, Miss Carter. Take a seat." Amelia obeyed reluctantly, her thoughts racing. Grant's words hurt because they were being used against her, not because they were completely untrue. She had indeed stood up for James following his conviction. She had called and written letters, but not because she was obsessed. It was motivated by love, because of an intense desire to establish her brother's innocence. Miss Steele went on. "Mr. Grant, in your opinion, does Miss Carter's behavior during her brother's trial suggest she is fit to represent a client in a legal setting?" "Absolutely not," Grant shook his head in response. "She lacks respect for the justice system and is emotionally disturbed. Allowing her to serve as counsel is risky in addition to being improper." The words were like a kick to Amelia's stomach. She struggled to maintain her composure as she held onto the sides of the defendant's table. She wanted to yell, to accuse Grant of lying, to tell everyone that her family had been destroyed by him. She couldn't allow him to witness her breaking, though. Miss Steele looked at the magistrate. "This evidence clearly shows why Miss Carter should not be permitted to continue, Your Honor. Her behavior throughout her brother's trial demonstrates a glaring lack of neutrality and professionalism. She is not qualified to act as a lawyer for anyone." Amelia got up quickly. "This is nonsense, Your Honor. Mr. Grant is not impartial. My brother was wrongly charged by him." Murmurs broke out in the courtroom once more. The gavel was pounded by Judge Grayson. "Put in order. I'm going to hold you in contempt unless you behave properly, Miss Carter." Amelia forced herself to relax by taking a big breath. "Your Honor," she stated in a stern but steady voice, "Mr. Grant's testimony is irrelevant and prejudicial. I humbly ask for the chance to cross-examine him if this court is genuinely concerned about justice." The judge paused, obviously conflicted. At last he gave a nod. "Excellent, Miss Carter. You can continue." With a racing heart, Amelia took a step forward. She had the opportunity to reverse the situation, but it would not be simple. Grant had the support of Miss Steele and was an expert manipulator. She had to be nimble, determined, and brave. "Mr. Grant," she said, her tone firm in spite of the tense atmosphere, "you say I caused disruptions during my brother's trial. Are you able to give concrete examples?" Grant grinned. "I'm not required to. Everyone in that courtroom witnessed your actions." "Calmly, that's not an answer," Amelia stated. "You must present proof if you want to accuse me of being disruptive. If not, your testimony is merely subjective." Grant's smile wavered a bit. "All right, you refused to accept the court's ruling and were noisy and combative. And you believe those actions motivated by a desire to fight for my brother's innocence, make me incapable of defending my client today?" "Yes," answered Grant dryly. "You're too emotional to handle a case like this." Amelia squinted her eyes. "Too emotional or too determined to let people like you exploit the system for your own gain?" There was a gasp in the courtroom. Grayson, the judge, bent forward. "Miss Carter, watch your tone." Amelia gave a nod, but she kept her eyes on Grant. "Let's discuss the evidence in my brother's case, Mr. Grant. In particular, the bar's security footage. Remember why it wasn't admissible in court?" Grant grew gloomy. "It was ruled inadmissible." "Why?" Amelia's voice sharpened as she pressed. "Was it because it contradicted your claim of assault?" Grant stirred uneasily. "I'm not here to discuss your brother's case." Amelia stepped forward. No, your purpose is to undermine me. However, we must also doubt your credibility if we are going to doubt mine." One could feel the tension in the room. Grant was about to answer when there was a loud bang from the rear of the courtroom. Everyone looked around to see what had occurred. In the doorway appeared a man, breathing heavily and with a pale face. His palm was shaking as he held up a USB. He responded, "I have evidence," in a shaky voice. "Evidence that proves everything she's saying is true." Chaos broke out in the courtroom once more. Amelia's heart pounded as she froze. What proof did this individual have, and who was he? More significantly, what role did it play in her case? With the USB disc clutched like a lifeline, the man in the doorway staggered forward. His rumpled suit and troubled eyes gave the impression that he had been deliberating for a while before making up his mind. Judge Grayson roared, "Order in the court!" as he slammed his gavel. "What is the purpose of this disruption, and who are you?" He struggled to regain his breath, but the man halted, his chest heaving. He said, "My name is Henry Willis," in a tremulous voice that could be heard clearly throughout the room. "I used to work for Victor Grant." There were whispers throughout the courtroom. The smug confidence Victor Grant had shown before vanished in an instant, and his face went white. His voice was sharp as he sprang up suddenly. "I protest this man's intrusion, Your Honor. He has no right to be here." Judge Grayson's brow was wrinkled as he looked from Willis to Grant. "You have disturbed my courtroom, Mr. Willis. This must be significant." Willis held out the USB device and gave a brief nod. "Your Honor, Mr. Grant's testimony is in conflict with the facts I have. It's video from the evening of Amelia's brother's incident." Amelia's throat tightened with breath. The security film that had been suppressed during James's trial was the clip. Her fingers whitened as she held onto the edge of the defendant's table. Anger rushed through Victor Grant's voice. "This is ridiculous. Years ago, such footage was declared inadmissible. It is no longer relevant." Willis's voice became more forceful. "It wasn't inadmissible, it was suppressed by you, Mr. Grant." Chaos broke out in the courtroom. Judge Grayson's patience was obviously getting thin as he continuously slammed his gavel. "Put in order! I'll keep this courthouse in order." Amelia stared at Willis, her heart pounding. She sensed that things were changing, even though she had no idea who he was or why he was stepping forward now. She had the opportunity to learn the truth about her brother's situation, as well as to defend Mr. Peterson. Judge Grayson turned to face Willis, his face grim. "Mr. Willis, do you have any proof to support these claims?" Willis held out the USB device once more and nodded. "It's all here, Your Honor, the footage, along with records showing how it was deliberately suppressed." Grant's expression contorted in rage. "This man is lying, Your Honor. He is an irate ex-employee attempting to make amends for a personal grudge." Amelia stood and spoke in a firm but urgent tone. "Your Honor, if this evidence is genuine, it could prove that my brother was wrongfully convicted, and it could also show that Mr. Grant's testimony here today is biased and unreliable." The judge, obviously frustrated, scratched his temples. "Miss Carter, this lawsuit is about Mr. Peterson, not your brother. Nonetheless, it must be taken into account if there is evidence supporting the reliability of a crucial witness." Grant's mouth tightened. "Your Honor, this makes no sense. I insist that you remove this man from office and remove his statements from the record." He was ignored by Judge Grayson. He looked over at the bailiff. "Get the disc back and make sure our IT specialist examines it. We'll ascertain its legitimacy." After approaching Willis, the bailiff took the USB device and gave it to the judge. The tension in the room was oppressive as the bailiff walked out of the courtroom to deliver it to the IT specialist. All eyes were on Grant, who now resembled a guy in a corner rather than the self-assured accused. Amelia's thoughts were racing with potential outcomes, while the courtroom awaited the viewing of the video. If the video was authentic, it might prove her brother's innocence and reveal Victor Grant as the phony he was. But why, after all this time, had Willis finally come forward? She turned to look at Mr. Peterson, who was observing the spectacle with a mixture of bewilderment and optimism. She said, I'm sorry, this is getting so complicated. He smiled slightly at her. Don't say you're sorry. No one has ever fought harder for me than you do. His comments caused Amelia's chest to constrict. She didn't think she would be so sympathetic to Mr. Peterson's situation. Falsely accused with the odds against him, he reminded her of James. She decided that she would not give up. The bailiff returned after what seemed like an age and gave the judge a laptop. He answered, "Your Honor, the video is real. No one has interfered with it." A flurry of whispers filled the room. Judge Grayson glanced at the bailiff and nodded. "Play the footage." The bailiff pressed play on the laptop screen that was facing the court. The bar was captured on the night of the brawl in the blurry black and white film. There, Victor Grant sat at a table with a number of colleagues, drinking and joking. James appeared in the picture a few moments later, composed and at ease. He went up to Grant, said something that wasn't captured on camera, and turned to walk away. However, what followed paralyzed the courtroom. Grant got up, grabbed James's arm, and gave him a nudge as he left. Grant delivered the opening blow, but James turned, obviously attempting to defuse the situation. The ensuing altercation was short, but Grant was obviously the one who started it. As she stared, Amelia's eyes pricked with tears. This was the reality, evidence that her brother had defended himself. Grant's face had become a deep scarlet, and she looked at him. The room fell silent as the video concluded. Judge Grayson's demeanor was gloomy as he sat back in his chair. "Mr. Grant," he remarked icily, "would you mind explaining this?" Grant faltered, his self-assurance eroding. "Your Honor, I don't know what this man is trying to pull, but—" Judge Grayson interrupted him. "That's sufficient. This court will not accept obstruction of justice or perjury. I propose that you reconsider the significance of this witness's testimony, Mr. Hayes." Daniel Hayes, who had said nothing during the commotion, gave a hesitant nod. "Understood, Your Honor." Amelia spoke loudly as she moved ahead. "Your Honor, this evidence casts doubt on Mr. Grant's credibility and raises concerns about the veracity of his charges against my brother. I ask that going ahead, this court proceed with the utmost caution while considering his testimony." Judge Grayson gave a nod. "Thank you, Miss Carter. However, let me remind you that Mr. Peterson is the subject of this litigation. Continue to concentrate on protecting your client." Amelia said, "Yes, Your Honor," but her thoughts were already whirling with potential outcomes. She might be able to reopen her brother's case and save Mr. Peterson if she could expose this proof. Miss Steele stood with a hard gaze as the courtroom calmed down. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess to regroup in light of this new evidence." Judge Grayson looked at the clock with a groan. "Fine. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. Amelia sat down heavily, her head whirling as the courtroom began to empty. The battle was far from done, but she had won this one. She had the unshakable impression that Miss Steele and Grant were not finished yet, and that their next move would be even riskier. Amelia sat by herself in the courtroom while the noise from the talks faded away. Her mind was racing with ideas while her fingers tapped uneasily against the table. The video, which demonstrated her brother's innocence and Victor Grant's deception, had changed everything. However, she was aware that this was only the start. Miss Steele wasn't the kind to give up lightly, and people like Grant didn't give up easily. Ethan followed Lily as she slid onto the seat beside her. Lily muttered, "That was insane," her astonishment hardly contained in her voice. "You totally crushed him." Amelia forced a small grin. "It's not over yet." With wide, excited eyes, Ethan pulled on her sleeve. "You'll prevail, don't you? Are you going to disprove everyone?" Amelia's heart hurt as she gazed at him. She didn't want to commit to anything she couldn't fulfill. "Ethan, I'm going to do my best. All I can do is that." The boy gave a seemingly content nod. Lily lowered her voice and leaned closer. "Who was that guy, the one with the USB?" Amelia gave a headshake. "I don't know. But if he hadn't arrived at that time," not wanting to consider how much worse things may have been, she trailed off. The courtroom was reassembled 30 minutes later. Whispers rippled through the room as everyone went back to their seats, and the tension was evident. Victor Grant had returned with a stern scowl on his face. Beside him, Miss Steele stood upright, her manner as shrewd as ever. With a harsh blow from his gavel, Judge Grayson stepped inside. "Let's resume our work. You have the floor, Miss Carter." Amelia stood up, her heart pounding. The stakes felt considerably higher today, even though she had studied this case very well. Given Grant's damaged reputation, she was certain Miss Steele would launch an onslaught. She had to make every syllable matter. "Your Honor," Amelia said steadily, "I have shown you that the prosecution's case against my client, Mr. Peterson, has serious weaknesses. The evidence that has been offered thus far is not credible or substantial. I plan to demonstrate that the charges against him are not just baseless, but also a part of a broader scheme to blame an innocent guy." She then went on to lay out her case, providing papers, financial information, and chronologies that refuted the allegations made against Mr. Peterson. Each argument she made built on the one before it in her deliberate and straightforward delivery. Even Judge Grayson, who periodically nodded as though reluctantly impressed, listened intently to everything she said. When she was done, Miss Steele stood with a thin line pushed to her lips. "Your Honor, even though Miss Carter's presentation was comprehensive, her client is nonetheless charged. Actually, I have further proof that I think will strengthen the case against Mr. Peterson." Miss Steele gestured to a clerk who gave her a folder, and Amelia stiffened. "Your Honor," smoothed out Miss Steele, "this document outlines a series of emails exchanged between Mr. Peterson and another employee at his company, suggesting his involvement in the alleged embezzlement." The judge looked over the paperwork carefully after she handed them to him. The judge's gaze worsened and Amelia's heart fell. She stared at Mr. Peterson, who appeared to have taken a hit to the belly. "Emails?" Amelia's voice was stern as she asked, "Your Honor, may I review the documents?" The judge gave them to him. Amelia's tummy rumbled as she turned the pages. With timestamps and headers that matched corporate data, the emails seemed authentic. Something didn't feel right, even though they presented a convincing picture of Mr. Peterson plotting to embezzle money. The wording seemed strange, too direct, too irresponsible. Turning, Amelia looked at Miss Steele. "I would like to inquire about the legitimacy of these emails, Your Honor. It's plausible to believe that this evidence might have been falsified in light of the contradictions we've already observed in this instance." The eyes of Miss Steele narrowed. "Are you accusing the prosecution of falsifying evidence, Miss Carter?" Amelia forcefully retorted, "I'm saying we need to verify the source. These emails will withstand investigation if they are authentic. If not," the connotation was obvious as she left the sentence hanging. The magistrate bent forward. "Miss Steele, how were these emails obtained?" Miss Steele said they were provided by an anonymous source within the company with ease. "The prosecution has verified their legitimacy." Amelia's mouth clenched. "Unidentified source? It's convenient that way. I kindly ask that the emails undergo forensic examination to verify their legitimacy, Your Honor." Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly against the bench as he thought about her request. "Excellent. Until an impartial forensic expert can examine the emails, the court will adjourn." There was a brief moment of irritation on Miss Steele's face as her poise wavered. Amelia saw it and a glimmer of hope appeared. Right now, she wasn't going to back down. Amelia and Mr. Peterson sat in a quiet nook of the courthouse during recess. With his hands shaking a little and his shoulders bowed, the man appeared despondent. He said, "I didn't send those emails," in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. "I swear I didn't." And softly, "I believe you," Amelia said. "We'll prove it." Mr. Peterson gave a head shake. "It makes no difference. I've already been found guilty by them. You've seen their gaze on me." Amelia put a hand on his arm and reached out. "I won't allow them to railroad you because you are innocent. You must have faith in me." He looked into her eyes, a twinge of hope mixed with uncertainty. Softly, "You remind me of my daughter," he remarked. "She never gave up on anyone either." Amelia's throat grew constricted. "Then I won't give up on you." The courtroom reassembled a few hours later. With a report in hand, the forensic analyst appeared at the witness stand. As Judge Grayson spoke to him, there was an electric tension in the room. "Have you completed your analysis of the emails?" "According to the expert, yes, Your Honor, and my findings are conclusive. The emails in question were forged." The courtroom was filled with gasps. Amelia turned at Miss Steele, whose face was a mask of scarcely hidden rage, and felt a surge of vindication. The gavel was pounded by Judge Grayson. "Miss Steele, this is a major development. The filing of fabricated evidence will not be accepted by the court. You'll have to describe how this happened." Miss Steele started to answer, but Victor Grant got up suddenly before she could. He pointed a finger at Amelia, his face flushed with rage. He yelled, "This is all her doing. She's manipulating this court to serve her own agenda." "Enough!" Judge Grayson slammed his gavel and snarled. "Mr. Grant, sit down or I'll have you removed." Seething, Grant sank back into his seat as he paused. Amelia watched him, her heart racing. She sensed that something was going to happen. Then it did. A man entered the courtroom as the door opened again. He had a haunting face, dark lines under his eyes, and was tall. His face was tense with intensity as he gazed straight at Amelia. The man said, "I need to speak," in a steady but strained voice. "I'm the one who forged the emails, and I did it because Victor Grant told me to." A conflagration broke out in the courtroom. As the pieces started to fit together, Amelia's eyes grew wide. What did this man's confession signify for everything she had been battling for? And who was he? The weight of the man's confession hung in the air like a thundercloud as the courtroom erupted in a flurry of yells and gasps. Judge Grayson's voice boomed over the din as his gavel smacked down repeatedly. "Put in order. I'll keep this courthouse in order." The man's eyes darted between the judge and Victor Grant as he remained motionless close to the entryway. It appeared as if he was considering running away or staying behind to deal with the mayhem he had caused. Judge Grayson said, "Step forward," in a firm and stern voice. "State your name and explain yourself." After hesitating, the man approached the stand carefully, his every step laden with hesitation. He said, "My name is William Tate," in his shaky voice. I worked for Mr. Grant." With a mask of rage on his face, Victor Grant leaped to his feet. "This man is lying, Your Honor. He is an unhappy worker who is attempting to discredit me by making unfounded charges." Judge Grayson gave him a fierce look. "Mr. Grant, you will sit down and remain silent until it's your turn to speak." With a gaze that might have melted steel, Grant sank back into his seat and complied despite his clenched teeth. Amelia kept a tight eye on him, her gut telling her that he was about to lose control. "Mr. Tate," the judge continued, returning his focus to the guy, "you've made a serious allegation. I advise you to provide a succinct and understandable explanation." Tate swallowed hard and nodded. "I was hired by Mr. Grant to falsify those emails," he said, his jaw dropping, "instructed me to fabricate Mr. Peterson's embezzlement. According to him, it was merely a necessary measure to safeguard the company's reputation." Judge Grayson's gavel struck down with increased force as the room surged once more. "Put in order. I'm not going to ask again." Amelia watched the situation play out, her heart pounding. Tate's shocking admission left more questions than it did answers. What else was Grant concealing, and why had he come forward now? "Mr. Tate," the judge went on, "do you have any evidence to support these claims?" With a swift nod, Tate took a tiny hard drive out of his pocket. His words, "Everything's on here, emails, instructions, payments, all of it." Judge Grayson slumped back in his chair, his face blank as the bailiff moved forward to take the hard drive. "The contents shall be examined by this court. We're going to be very careful till then. Would you like to question this witness, Miss Carter?" Amelia drew on her determination and arose, her pulse settling. "Yes, Your Honor," she said in response. She walked over to the stand and met Tate's gaze. Sweat speckled his forehead and his hands shifted restlessly in his lap. He had the appearance of a guy at the end of his rope. "Mr. Tate," she said in a composed yet strong tone, "why are you coming forward now?" Before responding, he paused and gave Grant a quick glance. "I couldn't live with it anymore," he replied. "I initially believed it to be about business, just doing as I was told, but then I realized how many people it was harming and how far it was going. I have a daughter as well. Knowing that I had done this, I was unable to look her in the eye." Amelia softened her tone and nodded. "You saying Mr. Grant directly instructed you to falsify evidence against my client?" "Yes," Tate firmly said. "He told me exactly what to do and paid me to keep quiet." "Did he threaten you in any way?" Amelia inquired. Tate paused once more before nodding. "He threatened to ruin me if I didn't do it, promised to ensure that I never again worked in this field." Amelia turned to face the judge, who was paying close attention. "Your Honor," she continued, "I think this testimony seriously undermines the credibility of both the prosecution's case and Mr. Grant's. I ask that this court act right now to make sure Mr. Grant is held responsible for his deeds." Slowly, Judge Grayson nodded. "These accusations are taken extremely seriously by this court. We will examine the evidence on this hard disk as soon as possible. You are hereby directed to stay in the courthouse until further notice, Mr. Grant." Grant didn't argue, but his expression contorted in rage. His self-assured exterior had fallen apart, and he was clearly shaken. Amelia sat silently, her thoughts racing, while the court retired once more to consider the fresh evidence. She had anticipated opposition, but this? It was astounding how far Grant had gone. However, she couldn't help but feel vindicated in some way. The truth was starting to show through the fractures for the first time. She was joined in the hallway by Lily and Ethan. Lily replied, "You were amazing in there," in a quiet voice. Tate's confession, total mic drop. Amelia gave a small smile as fatigue began to set in. "It's not finished yet. Grant isn't going down without a fight, and Steele still has cards to play." Pulling on her sleeve, Ethan did so. "Are you scared?" Her expression softened somewhat as she turned to face him. "But sometimes doing the right thing means being scared and doing it anyway." The mood was heated as the court met again. After returning with a report on the hard disk, the forensic analyst verified that its contents were authentic. It described an email, payment, and instruction trail that connected Victor Grant to the false evidence. As he spoke to Grant, Judge Grayson had a serious expression on his face. "Mr. Grant, the evidence that has been provided causes great distress to this court. You are hereby placed under arrest until your behavior is looked into further." He was arrested by the bailiffs. As they got close to Grant, the courtroom erupted in gasps. His face twisted in rage. He stood up suddenly. "You'll regret this," he growled, giving Amelia a fierce look. "You believe you've triumphed? This is not the end." Without flinching, Amelia maintained eye contact. She could see the despair in his eyes as he realized his well-built facade was coming apart. The courtroom started to calm down after the bailiffs led him out. Miss Steele stood with a stern look on her face. "Your Honor, while this development is significant, it does not absolve the defendant. The charges against Mr. Peterson still stand." Amelia got up and stood up. "All of the evidence against my client has been discredited, Your Honor, with all due respect. Mr. Peterson was obviously framed, and the prosecution's case is based on false information." Slowly, Judge Grayson nodded. "I concur. The charges against Mr. Peterson are hereby dropped in light of the evidence that has been presented." Amelia felt a sense of comfort as she heard the words. She turned to face the astonished Mr. Peterson. With tears in her eyes, she murmured, "You're free. It's over." Amelia couldn't get rid of the impression that Grant's final remarks were more than mere threats, though. Even as the courtroom erupted in applause, she had a feeling that the fight was far from done. The allegations against Mr. Peterson were formally dropped, and the courthouse was a hive of activity. As they fought for statements, reporters swarmed the steps outside, microphones pressed forward, and cameras blazing. With Mr. Peterson by her side, Amelia emerged into the sunlight, tired but victorious. He said, "You saved my life," in a voice that was shaking with appreciation. "I don't know how I can ever thank you." Amelia grinned, forgetting for a moment how tired she was. "You're not required to. Simply go about your life and look after the people who are important to you." With tears in his eyes, he nodded. "You're going to be an incredible lawyer someday." Although it felt good to be praised, Amelia's thoughts were already on the horizon. In her mind, Grant's last words replayed, "This isn't over." She was aware that they weren't merely a farewell. She had a suspicion that he had more tricks up his sleeve, because men like him didn't give up easily. At the outskirts of the crowd, Lily and Ethan were anticipating her arrival, their faces beaming with anticipation. "You're famous now," Lily yelled while gesturing with her arms. "Look at all these reporters." Even though she could feel the day's burden bearing down on her, Amelia laughed. She said, "Let's leave this place. I need a break." Later that night, Amelia was looking through her brother's old legal books while seated at her apartment's tiny kitchen table. The court triumph now seemed distant and unreal, like a dream. Her thoughts kept returning to the wider picture. Although Grant's arrest was a positive move, it wasn't sufficient. Her victory was overshadowed by James's erroneous conviction, which kept him behind bars. She snapped out of her reverie when her phone chimed. Lily was the one. Amelia said, "Hey," as she took the call. "What's up?" Lily sounded rushed, almost desperate. "Amelia, have you seen the news?" "No." Amelia scowled as she said, "Why?" "Turn it on, now." Amelia reached for the TV remote control and switched it on. A banner announcing breaking news appeared on the screen. Although the anchor spoke calmly, Amelia was chilled by the information in her report. Tonight's breaking news. Victor Grant was released on bond after being arrested earlier today on suspicion of falsifying evidence. According to sources, his legal team is getting ready to present a strong defense, arguing that the accusations against him are the result of a smear campaign that his former workers planned. Amelia's mouth clenched. "Released on bail already?" "Amelia, are you hearing this?" The phone crackled with Lily's voice. "He's not going down without a fight," Amelia responded. "I know," her thoughts racing. "He's attempting to change the story and paint himself as the victim. It is precisely what I anticipated." "What are you going to do?" Lily inquired. Amelia's determination solidified as she gazed at the television. "I will engage in combat. This is not something he can get away with." Amelia got up early the following morning and went to the neighborhood library. She understood that it needed facts, not just willpower, to defeat someone like Grant. Real, indisputable proof that was impossible to fabricate or ignore. She combed through financial information, public records, and whatever else she could find that would reveal his more serious transgressions. After several hours, the sun started to set and the library started to empty. Amelia kept staring at the television until her eyes burned, but she wouldn't quit. She was about to go to bed when she noticed something. A string of payments to a little-known consultancy firm. The sums were substantial, erratic, and aligned with significant dates in James's trial. Amelia's heart was pounding. Although the name of the consulting firm was unfamiliar, the pattern was clear. As her mind raced with ideas, she wrote down every detail. Was this the thing that was lacking? Could this link Grant to James's case of evidence suppression? She made the decision to delve further, putting her fatigue aside as she perused further documents. She paused when she saw a name. A former employee of the consulting firm named Henry Willis was described as the person who had brought the USB drive to court. With her mind racing, Amelia reclined in her chair. Willis was involved in Grant's scheme and wasn't merely a whistleblower. She might finally have the proof she needed to clear James, if she could get him to talk. Really talk. Willis was located by Amelia the next day. He occupied a little flat in a dilapidated and unremarkable building on the outskirts of town. Her heart thumping, she knocked on the door. The door creaked open after a long period, and Willis peered out with cautious eyes. He remarked, "You shouldn't be here," in a quiet voice. "It's not safe." Amelia said, "I need your help," in a beseeching tone. "You testified in court, but isn't there more to this? You have information regarding Grant that might clear my brother's name." Willis paused, a puzzled look on his face. "You're not getting it. Individuals like Grant don't simply let things go. I'll be next if I speak too much." Amelia said, "I'll protect you with firmness. Once you made the right decision, we can eliminate him permanently if you repeat the action." Willis rubbed his temples and sighed. "You're not understanding, child. This is more complex than you may imagine. Grant is merely the beginning. Behind him there are powerful individuals. To keep their secrets hidden, they will stop at nothing." Amelia felt sick to her stomach, but she was not going to give up. "They will continue to do this if we don't confront them. My brother and other innocent individuals will continue to bear the consequences." With a change in demeanor, Willis gazed at her. His shoulders drooped as though he were carrying an unseen burden, as he appeared to consider what she had said. At last he gave a nod. "Okay," he muttered. "But you must be prepared if we do this. There is no turning back once we begin tugging at these threads." Amelia stated, "I'm ready," in a firm voice. She entered the flat once Willis moved aside. He said, "All right," and shut the door after her. "Let's get to work." The stakes increased as Amelia and Willis started to disentangle Victor Grant's unscrupulous network. Every bit of data they found raised more concerns and increased the risk. Amelia was aware that she was treading carefully, but she was unable to stop now that the truth was at last within her grasp. Then one evening, after another late meeting with Willis, she came home to discover her flat door open. Dread gathered in her stomach as her heart fell. Her heart thumping in her ears, she carefully pulled the door open. Her laptop was gone, papers were all over the place, and furniture was flipped over in the ravaged flat. A single note with the words, "Stay out of this or you'll regret it," written in strong, ominous characters, sat on the kitchen table. Amelia's heart froze. She kept thinking about what Grant had said in the courtroom. This isn't over. He wasn't being fair when he came for her. Amelia's hands trembled as she glanced at the note, feeling a mix of fury and terror. In an attempt to regain her composure, she inhaled deeply. The message from whoever had broken into her flat was very clear: stop digging or pay the price. They didn't know her, though, if they believed that a scare technique would convince her to back down. Reaching for her phone, she called Lily. "Lily," she began, trembling, "my apartment was broken into." Lily's voice erupted in concern. "Are you all right? Where are you right now?" "I'm fine," Amelia murmured, despite her heart still pounding. "Everything is in ruins and I just got home. My laptop was taken by them." Lily's tone grew softer. Amelia paused. "I'm not sure. What if they are powerless? What if this only makes matters worse?" "You can't handle this alone," Lily stated forcefully. "Promise me you'll at least tell someone." Amelia let out a sigh. "All right, I'll give you a call." In less than an hour, the police showed up. As Amelia described the circumstances, 2 officers looked over the damage with glum expressions. As one of the cops bagged the message as evidence, she gave it to them. The officer inquired, "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Amelia paused. She didn't want to give away too much for fear of giving Grant or his supporters away. "I've been involved in a legal case," she stated steadily. "It's possible this is connected to that." Nodding, the officer took notes. "Our team will investigate and file a report. Just to be cautious, I advise spending a few days somewhere else in the interim." Amelia responded, "Thanks," even though she knew she couldn't afford to take her time. This onslaught, if anything, strengthened her determination. Amelia and Henry Willis met the following morning in a quiet cafe that was far from where she usually goes. She was afraid that their phone conversations would be recorded, so she hadn't informed him about the break-in. His face darkened as she described what had transpired. A low voice murmured, "This is exactly what I warned you about," Willis said. "Those that work for Grant don't play fairly. They are prepared to do worse if they are willing to break into your place." Amelia stated, "I'm not scared of them, despite a twinge of uncertainty. We're too close to the truth to stop now." Willis gave a headshake. You don't understand. Not simply Grant is involved. He is supported by a wide range of individuals, including executives, politicians, and even law enforcement. If we reveal this, they will all lose something. Amelia's eyes blazed as she leaned forward. After that, we reveal them all. We know there are more out there, and we have the hard drive. They won't be able to silence us if we can collect enough proof. Willis rubbed his temples and sighed. You're brave, youngster, I'll grant you that. However, if they determine that you pose too much of a threat, courage won't save you. Amelia considered the note, the invasion of her personal space and the gravity of her situation. She then considered James, who was imprisoned for a crime he had not committed. Her mind turned to Mr. Peterson, whose life had been all but ruined. Now she couldn't just walk away. Her voice was firm as she asked, "What's the next step?" After a moment of hesitation, Willis moved a folder across the table. "I have all of this information about the consulting firm. We'll identify the individuals behind the strings if we can track down the funds. Bank transactions, invoices, and internal memos were among the documents Amelia scanned after opening the folder. Every component was a piece of the puzzle. As she connected the dots, a web of corruption started to take shape, and her mind raced. She said, "This is huge," in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. "If we can prove this—" "It's not enough," Willis said. "We require more specific proof, something that links these individuals to their crimes directly." Amelia gave a nod. "Then we'll find it." Amelia went back to Lily's flat later that night, where she had made the decision to remain for the time being. With a worried expression on her face, Lily met her at the door. "You appear worn out," Lily remarked as she drew her inside. "You've been running yourself into the ground." Amelia sank onto the couch and whimpered, "I don't have a choice. If we don't move fast, Grant and his people will bury everything." Lily sat next to her and gave her a teacup. "Please just swear to me that you will exercise caution. I'd rather not lose you." Amelia gave a small smile. "I promise." Willis and Amelia made their move a couple of nights later. Equipped with the data contained in the folder, they broke into a consulting firm office building. Finding the files they required, copying them, and leaving before anyone saw was a dangerous approach. As they crept inside, the building was silent, with the faint glow of emergency lights serving as their guide. Despite the stress in the air, Willis led the way to a small server room, his hands steady. He murmured, "This is it," and took out a flash drive. Amelia nodded and watched the corridor, her heart racing. "Watch the door," she said. Each second seemed to drag into eternity as the minutes passed slowly. At last, Willis let forth a low cry of victory. He said, "Got it," and put the flash drive in his pocket. "Let's go." However, the sound of footsteps reverberated down the corridor as they turned to depart. When two security officers emerged, their flashlights cutting through the night, Amelia's stomach fell. "Hey, stop right there!" exclaimed one of them. Willis and Amelia both froze, their thoughts racing. The stakes had just increased to a perilous new level once they were apprehended. As the guards closed in, their flashlights shining in the dark hallway like spotlights, Amelia's breath seized in her throat. She looked to Willis, who appeared just as immobile. Knowing that getting discovered would mean losing everything they had just taken the chance to find, her mind was racing with ideas for a way out. "Remain composed," Willis said to himself, while his shaking hands revealed his own anxiety. One of the guards yelled, "Hands where we can see them," and advanced. Amelia's pulse thumping like a drum, she carefully raised her hands. She and Willis looked at one another, her eyes begging for any thought at all. However, one of the guards grabbed his radio before the other could say anything. "This is Team A," declared the guard. "We've got 2 intruders on the 2nd floor requesting backup." The second guard moved forward and made a flashlight gesture. "Go, you 2! You're accompanying us!" Amelia's heartbeat accelerated. She was aware that their mission would end if they were taken in. Now they needed to do something. She said, "Wait," in a remarkably steady voice. "We can explain." The guards looked at each other doubtfully. "Explain what?" inquired one of them. Amelia hurriedly nodded in an attempt to buy time. "You're trespassing," she said. "You're correct. We'll accompany you. I must show you something first, though. That flash disk contains it." She ignored Willis, who gave her a shocked look. The guards paused, obviously taken aback by her composed manner. "Look," she added in an agitated voice. "What's on that drive might save your lives, or your jobs. However, only if you see it before requesting backup." Another guard scowled. "What kind of game are you playing?" "No games," whispered Amelia, her voice hushed. "Are you aware of your employer? Are you aware of what they're concealing?" The guards looked at each other uneasily. Seeing a rift in their determination, Amelia persisted. "Are you not the one who has seen things?" "That don't make sense. The evidence is on this drive. We'll go quietly if you still believe we're lying after 5 minutes." The flashlight of the first guard flickered. "You have 2 minutes," he remarked sternly. "But if this is some kind of trick, it's not." With haste, Amelia answered, "It's not." With trembling hands, Willis loaded the flash disk into his laptop after she handed it to him. As the screen came to life, the guards leaned over and saw a number of incriminating files, including wire transfers to offshore accounts, invoices for fake proof, and emails describing bribery. As the guards perused the paperwork, their expressions grew gloomy. This is real," mumbled one of them. Amelia gave a nod. "That's why we're here. If this gets out, the people behind it will try to bury us, and you. But if we work together, we can stop them." The guards looked at each other for a while. The first one sighed at last, saying, "We didn't see you." He took a step back. "But you need to leave now." Amelia murmured, "Thank you," in a relieved tone. The tension in the air was still high when she and Willis snuck out of the building, packing stuff swiftly. Amelia had a surge of thankfulness and adrenaline. The evidence they had obtained may make all the difference, even though they had barely escaped. Amelia and Willis went over the files in great detail back at Lily's apartment. The corruption at the core of Victor Grant's operations was made more evident by each piece of evidence, but as they put it all together, a more sinister reality started to surface. Willis stated, "This isn't just about Grant," in a somber tone. "He's part of something much bigger. These accounts, these payments, they trace back to major corporations and even politicians." Amelia felt nauseous. This level of corruption was not what she had anticipated. She questioned, "What do we do with this?" After a moment of hesitation, Willis said, "If we go public, they'll come after us." Prior to nodding, "We need to find someone who can protect us and expose this at the same time. Someone with real power." After reading about an investigative journalist in one of James's old law books, Amelia contacted him the following day. Sarah Green was a bold reporter who had a reputation for bringing down prominent criminals. Amelia asked for a meeting and sent her an encrypted email outlining their findings. Sarah surprised her by responding in a matter of hours. That evening, the meeting was scheduled to take place at a quiet downtown cafe. Nervous and tense, Amelia and Willis arrived early. Sarah had a powerful presence when she entered. Before coming to their table, she scanned the place with her keen eyes while wearing a leather jacket and carrying a laptop bag. "You must be Amelia," Sarah remarked as she took a seat. "And you're Mr. Willis. Let's see what you've got." Sarah plugged the flash drive into her laptop when Willis handed it to her. Her face deepened as she went through the files. "This is huge," she exclaimed, glancing up at them at last. "If this is all verified, it could bring down some of the most powerful people in the country." Amelia gave a nod. "That's why we need your help. We can't do this alone." Sarah's eyes were attentive as she sat back in her chair. "I can get this out to the public, but you need to be prepared for the fallout. People will come after you, hard. Are you ready for that?" Amelia looked at Willis and paused. He appeared worn out yet resolute. "We're ready," she declared. Sarah gave a nod. "Then let's get to work." Sarah put in a lot of effort over the course of the following week to prepare her story and confirm the evidence. Willis and Amelia remained in hiding because they knew that each step they took would bring them closer to danger and the truth. Amelia was sitting by Lily's apartment window one evening when her phone rang with a text message from Sarah. "It's going live tomorrow, be ready." Amelia felt her heart pound. The truth about Victor Grant and the crooked network he was a part of would be revealed to the public tomorrow, but a feeling of dread overcame her as she gazed at the text. The battle was far from over. It was only the beginning, if anything. Amelia sat at the edge of the couch, gazing at her phone's screen as the morning light came in through the blinds. At 7 a.m., Sarah's tale went live, incisive, appearing on several platforms with the headline, "The Hidden Web of Corruption, Conspiracy, and the Fight for Justice," which made Amelia's heart race. In a matter of minutes, the tale became viral. Politicians made frantic declarations, news anchors analyzed the data, and social media erupted in anger. The involvement of Victor Grant, the fabricated evidence, the dubious activities of the consulting firm, and the larger web of corruption that affected both the government and industry were all covered in detail in the article. Amelia's pride flickered. This was what she and Willis had fought for, but the triumph was short-lived, tempered by a persistent feeling of fear. They had painted targets on their backs, but they had also revealed the truth. Sarah contacted Amelia at noon. Her voice was urgent yet forceful. "Amelia, it's a firestorm. The DOJ is opening an investigation, and Grant's associates are already scrambling. But there's something you need to know." Amelia held on to the phone. "What is it?" Sarah declared. "Grant's gone. He didn't show up to his scheduled court appearance this morning. Word is he skipped town." Amelia felt her chest constrict. "Gone? How? I thought he was under surveillance." "So did I," Sarah responded, her voice laced with resentment. "But someone helped him. I'm digging into it, but you need to be careful. If Grant's on the run, he might try to retaliate." Amelia took a deep breath. "Thanks for letting me know." There was a noticeable tension in Lily's apartment that night. With his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, Willis paced the living room. "I told you this would happen," he repeated in a whisper. "Grant's too slippery to go down without a fight. He's probably planning his next move right now." Amelia sat silently, her thoughts racing. "He's desperate," she remarked. "That makes him dangerous, but it also makes him reckless. If he tries something, we'll be ready," Willis said. "Ready for what?" Snapping. "You think we can predict his next move? He's got resources, connections. He could do anything." Amelia's eyes were steady as she gazed up at him. "We've come too far to give up now. The truth is out there and people are paying attention. That's what matters." With a groan, Willis combed through his hair. "I hope you're right." The media continued to be affected by Sarah's story the following day. In response to the corruption described in the piece, protests broke out in front of government buildings. A task force was established by the Justice Department to look into the officials and companies involved. Amelia was both hopeful and nervous as she watched the coverage. Even though justice was being served, she couldn't get rid of the uneasy sensation that something terrible was about to happen. That night, when she and Willis sat at the kitchen table going over documents, her suspicions were validated. Pale-faced, Lily rushed into the apartment. She held up her phone and said, "You need to see this." As Amelia retrieved the phone and read the message Lily had received, she felt sick to her stomach. From an unidentified number, it was a warning. "Leave as soon as you can. They are aware of your whereabouts." Amelia's voice wavered as she questioned, "Who sent this?" "I don't know," Lily replied. "It came out of nowhere." Willis jerked to his feet. "We need to leave, now." Amelia paused. "What if it's a bluff?" Willis asked sharply. "Do you really want to take that chance?" Amelia was aware of his correctness. Moving swiftly and silently, they packed what little they had and crept out of the apartment under the cover of darkness. Willis had made arrangements for them to stay in a friend's safe house, a tiny cottage in the woods out of sight. Despite the cabin's seclusion and solitude, it was hard to overlook the tension between them. Amelia tried to remain on top of things by spending her days reading through news updates. In the meantime, Willis kept his phone handy, prepared to depart at any time. They were sitting in the darkened living room one evening when Willis broke the ice. His voice was lower than normal when he asked, "Do you ever think about what happens after this?" Amelia raised her head from her computer. "After what?" "After Grant's gone? After the investigation? After the dust settles, Amelia let out a sigh. I don't know, I just want James to be free. After that, I haven't really thought about it. Willis nodded while maintaining a detached gaze. He stopped off, shaking his head. I used to think about it all the time. What life would look like if I hadn't gotten involved with Grant. But now it feels like there's no way out, decisively. There is a way out, Amelia stated. We just have to keep fighting. Willis remained silent, but there was still a hint of uncertainty in his gaze. Amelia woke up the following morning to her phone vibrating. Sarah was the one. Amelia, Sarah uttered in a pressing voice. We've got a lead on Grant. He's holed up in a private estate outside the city. Word is, he's meeting with some of his associates to plan his next move. Amelia's heart was pounding. Do you think he's trying to flee the country? Sarah concluded. It's possible, but we can't let him. If he gets away, everything we've worked for could fall apart. What can we do? Inquired Amelia. Sarah stated, I have a contact in law enforcement. If you're willing to testify about what you know, we might be able to get a warrant to raid the estate. Amelia paused. Although testifying would place her squarely in the crosshairs, it might also be the only way to permanently destroy Grant. I'll do it, she finally said. The hours that followed flew by. Amelia met with Detective Ramirez, Sarah's liaison and a resolute federal agent, to go over her testimony. A warrant was issued by the end of the day, and a dawn raid was scheduled. A weird calmness descended upon Amelia as she readied herself for what lay ahead. Although she was unsure of what would happen next, she was certain that she would not allow fear to stop her. Not right now. Never. The following morning, Amelia was outside the estate with Sarah and Detective Ramirez, observing the police encircling the house as the sun rose. Every second seemed to drag on forever, and the tension was tremendous. The raid then started with a single shout. Amelia gasped as agents rushed through the estate, accompanied by screaming and shattered glass. Her pulse thumping with excitement, she tried to see what was occurring. Then she caught a glimpse of him through the confusion. Handcuffed and enraged, two operatives bring out Victor Grant. For a minute his face contorted in wrath as their eyes met, but Amelia remained unwavering and tall. Although she had prevailed in this struggle, it was far from over. Not until all the puzzle pieces were put together. Amelia was certain she would always remember the picture of Victor Grant being escorted away in handcuffs. The burden of everything she had battled for fell upon her as he was placed into a police cruiser that was waiting. It was more than simply him. It was about truth, justice, and the opportunity to make up for the wrongs that had destroyed so many lives, including her brother. Amelia sat in a federal office's quiet conference room later that night, fatigued but determined. Detective Ramirez smiled slightly and brought her a cup of coffee. He remarked, "You did good. Grant's in custody, and the evidence you and Sarah provided is enough to keep him there." Amelia nodded, but she was aware that more needed to be done. What about his network, the people behind him? Ramirez's face became solemn. "We're building a case. The documents you found were a gold mine, but dismantling something this big takes time. It won't be easy, but it's a start." With a victorious expression on her face and her phone in hand, Sarah walked into the room. Her words, "The story's everywhere. Grant's arrest is trending on every major platform. Public pressure is mounting, and the DOJ has officially expanded their investigation." Amelia gave herself permission to grin a little for the first time in weeks. It's finally happening? The days that followed were hectic. Every aspect of the case was examined by news organizations, which revealed a network of corruption that was more extensive than Amelia had anticipated. Investigations were started in several industries, high-ranking officials were implicated, and resignations were pouring in. Amelia's sense of pride grew as she realized she had contributed to the dominoes falling. But one name kept coming back to her in the midst of the confusion. Amelia realized it was time to move forward when Victor Grant was taken into custody and the truth about the fabricated evidence came to light. Amelia stood outside the courthouse where her brother's appeal hearing was being held 3 weeks later. In an attempt to calm herself, she took a deep breath and adjusted the blazer she had borrowed from Lily. She had worked tirelessly to make this day possible, even though she wasn't formally defending James. That would be left to an experienced lawyer Sarah had helped her connect with. The courtroom was crowded inside as the defense unveiled the recently discovered evidence, the falsified emails, the concealed surveillance footage, and Grant's role in creating the case against James. Amelia sat in the front row, her hands gripped in her lap. The defense lawyer turned to face the judge when closing arguments began. "Your Honor, the evidence before you is clear. My client, James Carter, was wrongfully convicted due to the actions of corrupt individuals who manipulated the system for their own gain. Today, we have the opportunity to correct that injustice." The judge's ruling was swift. Amelia felt the burden of years of suffering and annoyance leave her shoulders as he read the words. "The conviction of James Carter is hereby vacated. He is to be released immediately." Amelia broke down in tears as the courtroom erupted in applause. James, who was now standing next to the lawyer, looked to her and grinned widely, incredulously. She rushed over to embrace him, putting her arms around him in what seemed like an eternal embrace. "You did it," he said in a small, impassioned voice. "You actually did it," Amelia corrected him, stepping back to gaze at him. "We did it," she said. "You believed in me when no one else did. I just returned the favor." Amelia was surrounded by a lot of attention in the weeks that followed. She received letters of encouragement from law schools, support messages from activists, and requests for interviews from reporters. However, Amelia's attention was on the following step. One evening, Mary outlined her strategy while seated across from James at their parents' dining room table. She declared, "I want to go to law school. For real this time. No shortcuts, no disguises. I want to do this the right way." James grinned, his eyes full of pride. "You'll be amazing." "You think so?" she inquired in a low voice. Firmly, "I know so," he said. "You've already done more than most lawyers ever will." Amelia couldn't help but think back on the path that had led her to her current position as she stood in her own courtroom years later, this time as an official attorney. She reflected on the people she had defended, the victories she had achieved, and the lessons she had gained about justice, bravery, and the strength of moral conviction. Beside her sat her first client, a young single mother who had been falsely accused of stealing. Amelia was prepared to make her opening argument when she looked at the opposing lawyer. Her voice was confident and firm as she smiled. "Your Honor, I'm here to defend someone who deserves the truth, and I intend to deliver it." The path of Amelia Carter, the brilliant lawyer who was once ridiculed and undervalued while standing in a courtroom, then came full circle.